Okay, let me pray for us and we'll get started. Mike might be just a little hot. Father, we come to you recognizing you are the creator of everything, including us. And I pray today as we talk about who you are as creator, that we will understand better who we are as your creatures, and that we will live for you more faithfully, worship you more faithfully, know you better. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, well, we've talked over the past few weeks about some of the attributes of God, what he's like. We've talked last week about the Trinity. He's 3 in 1. And today we're going to talk about the fact that he is creator. We're going to talk about the creation. And I just want to highlight several things that we believe. First of all, we believe he created out of nothing. So number one, created out of nothing. I believe it's the Latin. It's creation ex nihilo. It's from nothing, out of nothing. And the Bible teaches this, obviously. That's why we believe it, that before there was anything, there was God. He's always been, and which is hard to wrap our minds around. What does that mean? Before there was anything, before there was time, what does that mean? You know, we're limited. But nevertheless, before there was anything, time, anything, there's always been God. And at this moment, he created from nothing. He didn't use previously existing material. He just created from nothing, and he created by speaking. You know, you think about it, when we create, we have to use our hands, and we have to use existing stuff. My kids love creating stuff. They always want to do projects, you know, which usually involves paint and glitter and crayons, and it kind of drives me crazy because I just see all this stuff that has to get cleaned up. And my wife's a lot more patient with them, which is good. And they'll say, can we do a project? You know, is it outside or is your mom going to supervise? You know, those are my two caveats, you know. But God creates, but he doesn't create from previously existing material. He just creates from nothing. Some biblical evidence for this, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that word in the Hebrew, bara, means created from nothing. And Francis Schaeffer says these are the 4 most important words in the English Bible. In the beginning, God. Because the thought is, if you start here, there's a God who's in the beginning and he created it all. You should be able to, you can track to the gospel, you can track to the implications of what this means. But if you don't start here, in the beginning, God, then you don't start at the right place. You're going to end up being flawed in a lot of other areas as well. When Paul was preaching to a Jewish audience, he assumed they believed that there was a God. He assumed they believed in Genesis 1:1, so he didn't have to begin with God the creator. But when Paul goes to the Athens and he's preaching to people who were not Jewish, he had to establish, first of all, the creator God. You know, in order to understand the gospel, you got to first understand, in the beginning, God. He's the creator. He created us all. Because if you don't start there, you won't get sin, you won't get Christ or the cross or resurrection. None of it will really make sense to you. And so God the creator is central, fundamental, starting place. If we don't start there, we're going to definitely not end up in the right place. Some other passages, Psalm 33, verse 6, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all their host. And verse 9 goes on and says, for he spoke and it came to be, he commanded and it stood firm. Revelation 4:11, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. So it was God's will to create, so he spoke, and everything came into existence that is. And so he created all things from nothing. Any thoughts or questions on that first point? Okay, second, he not only created the physical world, he created the spiritual world. There's a spiritual world that exists. Doug was asking about demons, and we're going to talk about that in the coming weeks. There's this whole realm, this spiritual realm, that, let's be honest, we really wouldn't know much about if it weren't for the Bible telling us about it. And the Bible honestly doesn't tell us a lot about it. So it's still a mystery to us. What exactly does this demon world and spiritual world and angelic world, what does that involve? And, what does it look like? We can't go peel it back and see. We know it's there. It's very real. It's as real as anything else because the Bible says it is. But there's a lot of mystery to it, and that's okay. But we will be exploring some of that in the coming weeks. Prayer, demons, angels, that kind of thing. Here's some verses. Nehemiah 9:6. You are the Lord, you alone. You have made the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You preserve all of them. The host of heaven worships you. So he talks about how God has created the heaven of heavens, which is, I think, what we typically call heaven, the place where God is present in a special way. And then he talks about you have created all their host, which I think is a reference to the angels. He's created everything, including the non-physical world. In that sense, there are multiple worlds. In the song we're going to sing here in a little bit, when I consider all the worlds thy hands have made. I think that's the idea behind that lyric. All the worlds thy hands have made? Where are these worlds? Well, there's the world we see, and then there's the world that we don't see, and it's kind of a mystery to us, and God created it all. When I consider all the worlds thy hands have made. Colossians 1:16, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So all the things that have been created, the things in heaven, the things that are invisible, the things we can't see, the rulers, the authorities, it's all created by him and for him. Okay. Any questions about the spiritual creation before we move on? Yeah, that's a good question. The question is, was God by himself when he created, or were the angels there?
He said we created.
Let us. Yeah.
That Jesus Christ was there.
Right.
And probably the Spirit.
Yeah. We know that the three persons of the Trinity have always existed. So certainly there were three people, one God, in existence from all of eternity. But the question that you raise is an interesting one. When were the angels created relative to the rest of creation? And there's not an explicit teaching on this, but I think we can sort of do some deductive reasoning and logic. This is the beauty of systematic theology. We take what we know for sure, and then we try to kind of fill in gaps, which we have to be careful we don't fill them in too tightly. But I would say, it seems to me that the angels are created prior to the rest of creation, and that there's even a rebellion that takes place in some way, and how that happens and when that happens. But you certainly have the serpent coming along and tempting Eve in the garden, early on in creation, obviously. And so some point prior to that, there had to be a creation of this serpent and a fall of this serpent. So once again, when did that happen? Was it one of these days? Was it prior to one of these days? We don't have explicit teaching on it, so I wouldn't be real dogmatic about it. Well, yeah, what matters is Jesus Christ. Sure, yeah. It's not. That's a question. That's a good question. I think it's worth thinking about and exploring. But as you're saying, it's not going to have a ton of doctrinal or practical significance on other areas. So it is one of those questions that's good and fun, but wherever you land on it, it's probably not going to change your prayer life much, or your, this or that. So yeah, that's a good point. But fun to think about, We have imaginations, and we're supposed to use them and think well and biblically, so it's good and fun. I don't want to discourage it, but also don't want to encourage a church split over an issue like that. All right. Anything else on that? Okay, we're going to talk now about the direct creation of Adam and Eve. We believe direct creation of Adam and Eve. Very important, very clearly taught in the Bible. Genesis 1, verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And so far, the pattern through creation, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. Let there be, and there was. But now when we get to the final crowning work of God's creation, there's a change in the pattern. He doesn't say, let there be man. He says, let us make man in our image. And so it's a change. And the reason is because this is the highlight of all of God's creation. Man and woman created in the image of God. This is the apex. This is the highlight. It's all been leading up to this. And the whole world, in one sense, is created for the man and the woman. And they're put in the garden to work it and to be little representatives of God on the earth. And so, therefore, all people have value and dignity. You know, why are we pro-life? It's not first and foremost politics. It's first and foremost theology. It's biblical doctrine. All people are created in the image of God. Therefore, they bear the dignity of God, and we should value and protect all of life, regardless of race or gender or how old or how young, and so forth and so on. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the doctrine of man or anthropology. But we're created special, and we're created more like God than anything else in creation. One of the ways we're like God is we are relational. We have relationships, marriage. Another way we are like God, we are put in charge to lord our authority over the creation, to be good stewards of the creation. We are like God. Another way that our dignity is seen is the way he creates us is different from the rest of creation. He breathes life into us. He doesn't necessarily do that with the rest of the creatures. So Genesis 2:7, then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. So this is very different. The way God is creating the man is very different from the rest of creation. And then the way he creates the woman, of course, is from the man, right? And so both are very special, created in his image, male and female, created he them. The fact that there's a difference there is important, and we'll talk about that once again when we talk about the doctrine of man. Psalm 8:5, yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet. So the psalmist is saying, what is man that you're mindful of him? Why have you done this for us? Thank you for creating us with this dignity and glory and special relationship to you. Once again, we believe that Adam and Eve were created directly. The Bible is very clear on this. I think it would be really hard to say, I believe in the authority of the Bible, I believe the Bible is true, and then at the same time to say, I believe people evolved from a single cell, a single cell unit, They evolved over time, over millions of years to become Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were the first people, but it started way back here with the single cell. I don't think a Christian can be consistent and affirm both of these things, right? This Darwinian theory that we evolved from nothing and people are the byproduct of animals. I just don't think you can hold that and affirm that and also say, I believe in the Bible and the teachings of the Bible, which very clearly teach God created Adam and Eve. And it's not just Genesis 1 that teaches it. This is Jesus' interpretation. This is the interpretation of the New Testament. All sinned in Adam. Adam's the first man. Jesus is the second man. So I would argue it's just incompatible. You can't affirm both of these things. Now, there are some evangelicals who will say, they kind of take a middle ground, a middle road, and they'll say things like, I believe that Adam and Eve were created as a special direct creation, but I think that the world, the rest of the universe, evolved, and so it evolved over millions of years, and then God put Adam and Eve in the garden. And the problem with that position is this, you end up, you don't satisfy either side. The Darwinian scientists say, that's lunacy, that's crazy, so you haven't satisfied them at all. They still think you're a nut, right? And the evangelical side is saying, you're doing gymnastics, and then that means there has to be death prior to the fall, and the Bible doesn't seem to suggest that there's death and dying and decay prior to the fall. It seems to happen after the fall, which doesn't happen in the first day or second day or third day. So I personally believe in a young earth creation. I think the earth is relatively young. How then do we explain fossil dating and all of that? And I would say when God created the earth, just like when he created Adam and Eve, he created them with age. So when he created Adam, do we believe he created him directly? Adam was a 30-year-old man, let's say, right? Or let's say he was an 18-year-old man, I don't know. But he was created with 18-year-old bones. right? He wasn't created as an infant who grew and matured. He was created, it's miraculous, but I mean, that's what we're talking about. A God who speaks and he creates. So we're talking miracles here, right? We're talking revelation. But when he creates Adam and Eve, he creates them with age, with maturity. So I think it would make sense that he would also create the world, the universe, with maturity. So if they're looking at the sun, the rays from the sun, which are coming to them, from years prior, or they're seeing stars and the light is coming to them from years prior, say, well, how could that happen if the stars didn't exist prior to the day they were created? I would say, when God created it all, somehow, in some way, I don't understand. I mean, there's a lot of it I don't understand. But somehow he created it with the appearance of age, of maturity, right? So the world, I think, just as Adam and Eve have a sense of, an image of maturity, 30 years, not infants, in the same kind of way, the world has an appearance of age. So that would be my answer to that. This is not something that's like a litmus test for joining our church. We don't say, are you a young earth creationist? You can't join our church unless you are. This is not even a litmus test for us, for people to be in leadership roles, just to being honest with you. So this is not necessarily once again, we don't have a statement that we pass around and say, you have to sign this and say you're a young earth creationist to be a part of our church. We don't do that. But I personally am, and I'm guessing most people at our church who have thought about these issues are, but we would certainly welcome people to be a part of our church, and I'm guessing even in leadership roles, who would not necessarily affirm the young earth creation position, but they would need to affirm that Adam and Eve are the direct special revelation of God. Does that make sense? I think we'd have a real problem on our hands if they said, I believe Adam and Eve evolved from a single-cell organism over millions of years. I think we're talking two different universes here. So anyway, I don't really have any more on that unless somebody has a thought or a question on that. Okay. What's that? Nothing? All right. Okay, we're going to transition now and talk about the work of the Son and the Holy Spirit in creation. So the Trinity, the role of the Trinity in creation. Last week we said there are three persons, one God. Each person has a unique role that he plays in creation and in salvation. The Father directs. He orchestrates. He's the architect. The Son is the agent through whom the building takes place. And the Spirit is sort of the applier. He takes the work of the Son and applies it and sustains it. So let me point out some verses here. Listen to Hebrews 1:2. But in these last days, he, the Father, has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. So God created the world. The Father created the world, but he did it through the Son. The Son was the agent who carried out the plan of the Father. Another verse that talks about this is Colossians 1:16. For by him, Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. So the Son is present at creation. All things are created through him. He's the agent through whom it all comes together. And then finally we have the Spirit, whose unique role is to sort of sustain, hold together. Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So the Spirit of God is there hovering. Job 33:4. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. So the Spirit of God sustains life. So once again, unique roles of each person of the Trinity as it relates to creation. Any thoughts or questions on that? Second verse that I referenced? Under which one? The Son, Colossians 1:16. Okay, fifth, creation is distinct from God, yet dependent on God. Distinct, yet dependent Misspelled dependent. Yeah. Here's the point. God is distinct from creation. He is not creation. There's God, creator, and there's creature. And keeping that distinction is crucial for a biblical Christian worldview. Creator, creature, creation. So two different things, and the creation is very dependent on the creator. So God is both outside of it, or what the big fancy word is transcendent. He's beyond it. He transcends. He's much bigger. And yet he's also immanent. He's near and he's in it, and he's the one in it holding it together. So you say, which one is it? Is God big and far and out there and very much other, or is he near and close and within and holding it all together? And the answer is it's both. He's both transcends and he's immanent. So here's a verse that talks about both of these. Ephesians 4:6. There is one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. So he's over it all and he is through it and in it. And I think it's interesting. I've noticed that all people I think tend to think of God in one of those two ways, and they tend to emphasize either his transcendence or his immanence. And I've even noticed that there's sort of generational differences, so like I think if you were talking to my grandparents' generation and you were to say, do you think of God more as being sort of wholly other than us and big and out there, or do you think of him as being near and father and caring and loving? I think my grandparents' generation would tend to say, he's wholly other, and you revere him, and you be careful when you talk about him. And then I think if you were to talk to people my age and younger, Christians, you're going to tend to hear more like, he's my daddy, and I crawl up in his lap, and he holds me, and I love him, and it's very intimate language. And it's not that one of those is right or wrong, it's both and, right? And the intimacy doesn't mean much if he's not the other, and so we have to affirm both. But I think it's helpful to recognize that we do tend to gravitate toward one or the other. And I can even look at my life. I've gone through seasons where I've thought of him as being more transcendent or more immanent. And it's just good to affirm both and recognize both. And if you tend to be a person who sees him as wholly other, that's wonderful, that's great, but you also need to lean into this idea that he's near and he's father and he does care. And if you tend to be he's near and he's father and he cares, that's great, but don't neglect the other. He's very holy and very other and very powerful and big, and there needs to be a sense of awe and reverence, even while there's a sense of daddy and father, right? Any thoughts or questions on that concept? Okay.
Maybe I'll just say, as you view the creation, you see the characteristics of the Creator, and that gives an interplay in between those two that fit throughout the
Yes, that's a great point. That's a great point, and I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna come back to it here in a second because I think it's gonna lead in real well to what we're about to say. It's a great point. And that is, we're talking now about purpose. What was the purpose of God creating? His purpose was to demonstrate his glory. So the purpose of the creation is to demonstrate the glory, the otherness, the power of God. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. So God didn't need to create, but he chose to create, and he chose to create in order to glorify himself. Just like an artist may create an artwork with the sense of, I did this. This is kind of pointing to me. This is my handiwork. In a similar kind of way, not exactly the same, God creates in order to say, I did this. Glorify me. Look at what I've done. And so I do think we should, as you're saying, recognize the complexity of it all, the intricacy of it all, the logic and the order of it all, the patterns, the seasons. There's so much that we could say about creation. It's big, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's creative. The sunsets, sunrises, they're just glorious. What are some other things that I'm thinking of here? Just the ordering of it, the pattern of it, the beauty of it. It demonstrates God's wisdom. It demonstrates his power. It demonstrates his creativity, his beauty. You know, because if it's big and powerful and wise, how much more big and powerful and wise is he? So it is. I think God intends for us to appreciate the creation, marvel in it, study it, learn it, and not as an end unto itself, but an end to ultimately say, "Wow, God did this." You know? I mean, and even the smallest little thing. I think I talked about recently in a sermon, just the concept of human skin. It's just absolutely remarkable that you can get a cut or a burn in a few weeks. You know, it's like it's back to normal. You know, it just healed itself, and it's just the body, the way the body works. And we could just go on and on. You know, eyebrows right here. You know, my understanding is to cause the sweat to go away from your eyes as much as possible. So they're at this angle, so that the sweat will come down and sweep it away. You know, like how that didn't come about through some long millions of years of that's God's design and wisdom, and you know, just creating something as small as eyebrows that have a function for us, and just the list goes on and on and on, right?
That's in his image.
Yes. Yeah, we bear his image. We are rational, we are symmetrical, we are functional, able to function and run and walk and do all these things, and we bear the image of God when we do that. And because we are even more complex with minds and all of this, all of creation was designed to worship God, but we in particular are designed to worship God. And we can worship him in a way that none of the rest of creation can, because we can actually know him with our minds and have a relationship with him. And we have a spiritual component to us that nothing else in creation does. We are spiritual beings in a way that animals are not, right? And so we are more special than animals. And I know that maybe doesn't go over real well in Colorado, but it's true, right? And not to say that they're not special, you know, they're special, but not like humans. And so we are unique, dignity, image bearers of God, and therefore the onus is on us even more than the rest of creation to be worshipers and to worship God, the one true and living God, because that's what we're created for that. All of creation is created to worship, and we are especially because of our unique design. And I would also add to that God created us to be people like him who create. And we're supposed to be creative and design things and build things and be architects and builders and engineers and all that kind of good stuff. I mean, there's something about a person who builds and constructs, or imagines it and dreams it, or is the one who actually gets their hands dirty and does it. There's something about that. We are bearing the image of God. We are being lords over creation, creating a world that's good, a civilization that has purpose and design. I mean, this is a part of the flourishing of society, the building of society and a culture. This is all meant to honor God and point to God. And of course, we live in a sinful world, and it's all gotten off track, and nowadays it seems like it's even more off track than it's ever been. So that's a part of the story too. But deep down, there's something good, and that brings us to the seventh point here. The universe that God created was very good. Good creation. God is the one who created it. He stepped back from it. Genesis 1:31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. 1 Timothy 4:4, for everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving. So this is a good reminder to us. The creation is good. The human body is good. God created it. There is this kind of an extreme that you find among Christians that sort of the creation is bad, the human body is bad, and that's just not right. It's not good theology. God created it good. It is good. Now, is there a chapter 3 in Genesis where everything gets tainted and affected and impacted? And absolutely. So is there a sinful part of the world a fallen curse that it's under, that we get frustrates us? Absolutely. There's thorns, and when you try to work the ground and try to build the buildings, things happen and earthquakes happen, and it's frustrating. And you say, this isn't good, and we're right to say, this is wrong, this is bad. But the starting point, at the beginning, it was good, and there's still elements of that goodness. There's still elements of the order. There's still elements of the structure and the rhyme and the reason, and we should delight in that. And even we as people, as humans of flesh, there's something about us that's good, inherently good. I don't mean that morally. I mean good in the sense of we are image bearers. We're still image bearers. Every person created in the image of God is an image bearer of God, and therefore value, dignity, worth. Now, once again, did all people sin, and therefore we become corrupted? And as Paul says in Romans 3, there's no one good, not even one. Absolutely. But God still is in the plan and in the process of redeeming it. So the world is going to be redeemed. The creation is going to be redeemed. People are going to be redeemed. Our bodies are going to be redeemed. One day we're going to be in heaven with good, glorified bodies that don't get sick and cancer and all of these terrible things. So I think we go to too far of an extreme when we say the world is evil, our bodies are evil, let me just fly away and get out of here, and just go to heaven. I mean, there's some part of that that's good and accurate, but there's another sense in which God is going to come back to the fallen world, the fallen body, and he's going to redeem it and restore it and make it good again. And it's going to be the garden redeemed, and it's going to be better than it was even in the garden. So I think sometimes we get a little bit too far off in seeing too much discontinuity between the original garden and heaven, as if these are two totally different things that have a lot of discontinuity. I think there's a lot of continuity between the garden, the way things were supposed to be, and the way things will be one day in heaven. A lot of continuity between the two. But it's going to be good. Does that make sense? Any thoughts or questions on any of that? Okay, one last thought on that. We should therefore enjoy the creation. And I think living in Colorado Springs gives us an extra opportunity to do that, to get to explore around in the mountains and see the leaves changing and maybe ski down a ski slope or something like that. And just enjoy it, play in it, and delight and enjoy in the creation. And that's a part of what it means to be image bearers and enjoy the creation of God and give him the glory in that. All right. Any thoughts or questions on any of that? Okay. Yes, sir. That's fine.
We have to have some reliability on the Holy Spirit to help us interpret what we see in God. We're never going to quit learning new things about God's creation, about nature.
Right.
Particularly when you throw time in there.
Yeah.
Things that you have to understand that as you look at God's creation as God, it has to include something that's beyond what we're able to understand, and we're just learning a little bit at a time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I'll try to kind of paraphrase what I think you're saying. Natural man left to himself is not going to come to the conclusions we're coming to here. We need God and his Spirit opening our eyes, revealing these things to us, and then we grow in them and learn in them, and we're on a process of maturing and learning to think about God and ourselves and creation. And it doesn't just come overnight, and it certainly doesn't come to the natural person. It takes a quickening of God's Spirit for a person to even be thinking along these lines, because as we know, as Romans 1 says, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the doctrine of man, man's inclination is to reject what's obvious and true. So what's obvious and true is there's a creator, he's glorious, and you owe your life to him. That's obvious, true, just fundamental reality 101. But what's the very first thing that people reject? There's not a God. There's not a creator. I'm my own God. I can say right and wrong. And so right from the get-go, we got a problem on our hands. We got a world full of people who have bought into a lie. And the only reason why we haven't is because of God and his Spirit opening our eyes to the truth and the glory of him. And we need to recognize we don't come to these conclusions because of our own wisdom. We come to these conclusions because God has revealed these things to us. Yeah, it's good. Okay, here's what I want to do now. I think that a really strong relationship between what we've just been talking about, God the Creator, creation, and what is called worldview thinking. And here's what worldview thinking is. Everybody walking on this earth has a worldview, a view of the world. I like to think of it like glasses. Everybody's wearing a pair of glasses, a lens through which they see the world and think about the world. And it's good to recognize this. So when you're talking to your neighbor, where's she coming from? Where's her worldview? And basically, a worldview is the way that people think, trying to be consistent, the way they think about the big issues of life. Like these things, like what is ultimate reality? We would say God is ultimate reality. Some people would say God's not ultimate reality. Stuff, the physical world is ultimate reality. Is there a God? Who are people? Are people special and unique among the rest of the world, or are we just kind of part of the world? Is there right and wrong? And if so, how do we know? Where does it come from? Where did we come from? What's the beginning of the story? We all know we're here, but where did we start? You know, you talk to 5 neighbors in your neighborhood, and you're going to get 5 different answers. Where are we going? Where does this all end? Does it just end one day and it's over? Or does it go on? What's the end goal? What are some other big questions like that? What's the purpose of life? So here's the thing. What I want to do now is I want to share with you 5 worldviews and kind of think of them from this framework of how they think about God, how they think about what we would call the creation or the universe. And I think it'll help us think through the way people in our world are thinking and how we should be thinking and how we can interact with them given the major differences that we have with them. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so here's 5 major worldviews. I think it's all related to what we've been talking about. All right. The first worldview we're going to talk about is the Christian worldview. The Christian worldview says there's a God and there is creation. That's it. There's only 2 things, God and creation, creator and creation. So God creates and God chooses to enter into his creation and act in it. And he has and he does. So how do we know right from wrong? Because God tells us. We have special revelation in the Bible. We have natural revelation. He creates people in his image who know the difference between right and wrong. Who are people? People are very valuable. Why? Because they're created in the image of God. Where did we come from? We came from God. He created us. Where are we going? One day he's going to return and he's going to redeem it and he's going to restore it. And so these are the way we would answer the big picture questions from the Christian worldview. All right? Any thoughts or questions on the Christian worldview? I'm guessing everybody in here, you're operating from a basic Christian worldview. This is how you think about things. This is how you think about where you've come from, where you're going, why do people have value, how do we know right from wrong, what's the meaning of life, what's ultimate reality. We're all on the same page. We might disagree about some of the particulars on what day were the angels created or something like that, but no big deal. We can agree to disagree on those things. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, we're doing our best to put these images on the video. Yeah. Okay, so that's the first worldview. Here's the second worldview. It's called deism. Deism, that word D is God. So there is a God, a creator. There is a creation. So this is very similar to Christianity so far. God is the one who created, but he does not enter into creation. He does not act on creation. Therefore, there are no miracles. He doesn't come in and ever suspend the laws of nature. It's kind of like the image that's used is like a person who winds up a clock. You wind up the clock, and then you set the clock down and you walk away from it, and it works, and there's design, and there's order. And it has order because the Creator gave it order. He designed it and spun it and designed it, but then he stepped away from it and it's doing its thing. So it bears some of his image, but he's not closely involved acting on it. Does that make sense? So you'll have a deist will talk about God, they'll talk about the Creator, they'll talk about the Almighty. They believe there's right and wrong because God created the world, and people know right and wrong because there's a design and an order. But there's no divine revelation. There's no Bible that's divinely inspired by God. So you have people like Thomas Jefferson, for example, one of the founders of our country, who was the classic deist. And he loved some of the teachings of Jesus, and some of the teachings of Jesus he hated. So he had what we call the Jefferson Bible, and what he did is he cut out all the miracles. Any miracle didn't happen. Miracles don't happen. But he loves the moral teaching of Jesus. Turn the other cheek. Love your neighbor as yourself. He loves it. So you have the Jefferson Bible, which is cut out. So many of our founders of our country were deists. So you read their writings, and it talks about the Almighty and God and the Creator, and you go, well, look, they're clearly Christians. Look at their writings. They're talking about the Almighty. Yeah, but they're talking about a deist understanding of the Almighty. Now, were there also some Christian founders? Absolutely there were. And all of them were operating from a basically Christian or deistic worldview. So I completely agree. We have a country that's founded on Christian Judeo values, in a worldview. I mean, they knew their Bibles. Jefferson probably knew his Bible better than any of us in here, right? They knew their Bibles. That's how they learned. That's how they learned to read. They learned to read from the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress, They were very conversant with the Scripture. All the educated people were in that day. So anyway, I think there are still deists, but you especially saw it around the turn of the Enlightenment, where they rejected a lot of Christianity. Christian doctrine, the doctrine of the Trinity. A lot of them were Unitarians. You look up, where did a lot of the founding presidents go to churches? A lot of it were Unitarian churches, not Christian churches, right? Where they were members. But they definitely had a theistic worldview, frame of reference, frame of mind, a way of thinking. So deism is an important worldview that's helpful for us to understand. Sometimes you talk to a person who believes in God, but it's very different understanding and version than what we understand God to be, who acts in the world and who speaks. Any questions on deism? Okay, here's the third worldview. Naturalism or materialism. Naturalism or materialism. The diagram that you draw here is just universe. And that's it. They believe all that exists is nature or material things. There is no God. So what is ultimate reality? There is no God. There is no spiritual being. All that exists is stuff. It's matter. It's cells and organisms. Where did it come from? Of course, this is the view that would buy hook, line, and sinker into Darwinian evolution. It came from nothing. You say, well, how can you repeat that? And is that repeatable, demonstrable? No, it's not. But so they have certain theories, just like we do. They have certain faith commitments they make. They have to account. They have to ask the question, where did we come from? There's obviously stuff here. Where did it come from? If there's not a God who created it, why do we have something rather than nothing? Where did it come from? And the answer is it came from nothing. At one point there was nothing, and then the next day there was something, and then so forth and so on over millions and millions and billions of years. This is how we got where we are today, right? Where are we going? Where does it all end? What happens when I die? The answer is you are all you are is a material physical being, and when you die, you just go to the ground and that's it. But there's no more. You might as well eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. There's nothing after that, right? What about ethics? Is there such thing as right and wrong? I think if they're consistent, they'd have to say it's really not truly right and wrong, because we say there's right and wrong that are based on these sort of external standard. God speaks, and we say this is right and this is wrong. The true materialist, I think if they're honest, would have to say you just survive. Like your goal is survive. And if you are going to do something wrong, just don't get caught so you don't get thrown in jail, Now, I think an honest, if a materialist were here, if a naturalist were here, this would be an atheist, and if they were to hear me say this, I think they'd want to push back and say, we believe that, that the society determines what's right and wrong, and people kind of collectively, we kind of put our heads together and figure out, do we want to have murder or do we not? We all agree murder's wrong, so we call it wrong, and it helps us function in society. So I think they would push back a little bit and say, we do believe in right and wrong. We do think it's wrong for somebody to come steal from me. But I would push back and say, yeah, but I can give you a big reason why I think it's wrong. I don't think you can really convince me why you really think it's fundamentally wrong. And I don't think you can use the category right and wrong. You can use the category legal, illegal, or we'd rather have a society that does this than does that. So therefore, let's create a society that does more of this and less of that. But I don't think at the end of the day you can really truly call it wrong. Because wrong according to what? What standard? If all that we are is just stuff, if that's all that exists is just material world, according to what standard is something wrong? And it also raises the question, why are people valuable? Why are you placing more value on a human than on a whale, for example? And someone would push back and say, well, we do want to put more value on the whale, and we think we need to be saving more whales, and trees while we're at it, and this is where you get a worldview collide between people who say, it's a tree. If we need to have a fire, let's cut it down and burn it. We need a fire. We need to stay warm. People are more important than trees. Cut down the tree. And then you have other people say, no, save the tree, right? Who cares if the people get cold? And I think the Christian worldview doesn't say, let's go cut down all the trees. I think the Christian worldview says, we want to be good stewards of the creation. So let's not just go cut down the trees. But if we need them to advance culture and to keep people warm and so forth and so on, then by all means, we need to cut down the tree. We hate to do it, but we need to do it, right? So this is where you get those worldview collides from. Why did this group have values that are over here? Why are these people valuing this over here? Why do these voters tend to vote based on these issues, and these voters tend to vote based on these issues? And you get this collide, which in our country seems to be pretty down the middle, this clashing. And the worldview thinking is a big part of it. It's a big reason. And understanding that is huge. Understanding, why does my neighbor think like this or value this and not that? It's good for me to understand this. All right, any questions on naturalism or materialism? Yes, sir. Like where would each group, how would each group view salvation, or how would I share the gospel with each group?
How would each group view salvation?
Okay, I got you. How would each group view salvation? Well, you know the Christian answer to that. Yeah, number one's easy, you know that. Number two, the deist, I don't think they have a salvation. In fact, none of these have, except for maybe four. The next one I think would have a view of salvation, but the others I don't think would have. There's no real goal of where we're trying to go. I think number two would say our goal is to try to make society better, culture better. God created it. He wants a design. The salvation is the world a better place. The third one would say there is no salvation. You die and that's it. Here's the fourth view. The fourth view is pantheism. Pan means all. Theism, theos is God. So God is in all. So pantheism it's kind of interesting irony. It's very similar to naturalism, except God is all that there is. So there really is no world. There really is no universe. It's just all God. There's no distinction between God and creation. In the Christian worldview, there's creator and there's creation. In the pantheistic worldview, which is represented by the Eastern religions, right? Hinduism, Buddhism. The goal, the goal is to sort of, sort of absorb into God. And you got reincarnation and animals. You don't want to eat these animals because these are our ancestors who died and came back as a butterfly or a cow or whatever. And so you say, where do they come up with this stuff? Everything is God. This is why. I think if they're honest, you have to say, just like with naturalism, at the end of the day, people aren't really more special than anything else. And they'd have to say, yeah, because God is in it all. God is in people. He's in the mountains. He's in the birds. He's in the cows. He's in all of it. It's all his. It's all valuable because it's all him. Or him may be a little strong because he is not personal. Everything is God. And so there's reincarnation. There's nirvana is sort of where it's their view of salvation is nirvana. This kind of nothingness. You get to a point of nothingness. You are one with the creation. Yoga, right, it was originated from this sort of Eastern religious mindset of escape from the world. The universe is not ultimate. God is what's ultimate, not the Christian God, the pantheistic God. So try to escape from it and just be one with reality, one with the world, one with the universe, right? This is the origins behind yoga. I'm not saying everybody who does yoga has that mentality or that worldview, but I'm saying that is the worldview behind the origins of yoga. Okay, any thoughts or questions on pantheism? It's basically naturalism, but just with a spiritual twist. Okay, and then the fifth worldview that may be in some ways the most pertinent to today. Like when you're dealing with your neighbor, especially if your neighbor is my age or younger, right? This is a good chance you are dealing with a postmodernist. Postmodernist, basically, postmodernism has existential roots, nihilistic roots. Existentialism is the idea that previously, in all prior eras, the philosophy, the theology of the day was, here's what's true, and then we kind of come under these true statements. So there's truth, there's reality, and then we live in that reality. And so all the philosophy was trying to figure out what is true, and then we go. Postmodernism said, you don't start with these principles. You don't start with truths. You don't start with essence. Existence precedes essence. That's kind of the catchphrase. So you have a person. The person is what is true. The person becomes God. The person is God. You are God. So there's what is true for you, what is right for you, right? So if you are a person who believes in Christianity, and you believe in Jesus, and you go to church, and that helps you, and that's what's right to you, then that's your truth. That's your world. That's true for you. It works for you. But if that doesn't work for me, and I don't believe those things, and I believe one of these other categories, I'm a naturalist, or an atheist, or a pantheist, or a deist, then that's what's true for me. That's what works for me. That's what's right for me. That's the world I live in. So it's not like there's one world and we all live in it and there's these truths of the world that define us all. Instead, there's millions of little worlds because we each have our own little world. There's my world and there's your world. And the only cardinal sin in postmodernism is you don't get to tell me if I'm right or wrong. I define my reality. I define my world. I define if there's a God or not, what's right or wrong, because I am God, right? And I'm okay as long as my beliefs don't interfere with you. That's the only cardinal sin. Just don't let you just don't interfere with me and don't tell me I'm wrong, and we're fine. So if you want to believe in Jesus and go to church and put signs out in your yard all day long, that's your thing. It's your world. But you can't come over and tell me that I'm wrong or that I need to do this or that, or that there's a God, or that I'm going to have to answer to him one day. That's the only cardinal sin in postmodernism. So, when you're talking to a person, it's good to do a little analysis here. Am I dealing with a person who's operating from a Christian worldview, a deistic worldview, a naturalist worldview, a pantheistic worldview, or a postmodernist worldview? And the truth is, people are very inconsistent. And they'll act like a postmodernist, and then you ask them a question, and all of a sudden they'll sound like, they'll waffle around. And that's our job, to kind of help them see those inconsistencies. Like, why are you saying this, but then over here you're doing that? And it's important for us to make sure we're being consistent. We have a consistent Christian worldview, because I know a lot of Christians tend to they operate from a Christian worldview, but then all of a sudden they can sound very postmodernistic, like, you can't tell me I'm wrong for doing this. Well, right? You're operating from now you've changed. Yes, sir.
Where would Islam fit in this? Because they sort of have a God creation,
Right.
but their God is the moon god, which is a false god.
Yeah.
Where would these fit in?
Yeah, the question is, where does Islam fit? I would probably put them in the category of deism. It's not classical deism the way that, but it is, there's a creator, he created, but he's not personal. And, there are nuances under each of these. And there's vast universes under each of these. But nevertheless, if I had to put Islam under one category or the other, I'd put it under number 2. Good question. Any other thoughts or questions? Is that helpful for thinking like that? That's what, when we hear people use the term worldview, this is what you mean. Your people's view of the world, their big, how they think about the big questions of life. Are people valuable? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Is there right and wrong? What's ultimate reality? And you could generally take all people in the world and pretty much put them into one of those categories. Everybody, and that's the point. Everybody has a worldview, and therefore everybody has a religion in this sense, or a faith in this sense. They have faith commitments. They have values. Everybody is operating from certain values. And they'll try to tell you I'm not. I only think about things from a scientific perspective. People will say that. Well, but they're operating from this third worldview. They have certain values, commitments, which is fine. But they need to be honest about it and not just act like I only go with what the facts say to me, Yeah, but you're making a pre-commitment. They have a pre-commitment to this worldview that a lot of people aren't even aware of that they do. But anyway, I could go on and on. Yes, sir. Where would Mormons be? Yeah, Mormons are not Christians. I was clear on that last week. But in the general framework, they're going to fall under category 1 in terms of the way they think about the world. They think there's a creator. They think there's a world. Now, some of the details are weird, and some of the details are very unchristian. But if I had to put them in one of the 5 categories, I'd put them in the first one. The way they think about the way they would answer the big questions. So I want to be really clear. I don't think they're Christians, but I do think they're operating generally from the same worldview. So I could hypothetically vote for a Mormon, even though I think they're wrong, but I think that they've got a worldview that could allow them to operate as a leader that's respectable in making decisions that are consistent with a Christian worldview, just hypothetically speaking. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Can I go back to the earlier discussion for a moment?
Sure. Yeah. So the question is, if all people are created in the image of God, what about people who have certain jobs, such as military or police, who might be required to take a life? If it's created in the image of God, how could that ever be justified to take a life if the life is created in the image of God? I would go back to the Old Testament and say, there are times when life is so valuable that taking the life is actually required. For example, if it's going to save, if one person is about to try to kill these 100 people, I think it's morally right and justified to take out the one person, to kill the one person, if it's going to save these 100 people. Because these 100 people are created in the image of God. So I'm giving a very extreme example to try to answer the question. These 100 people are created in the image of God, so because we live in a broken, fallen world, as terrible as it is to have to kill this one person, there are times, they should be exceptions to the rule, rare, never celebrated, always an awful thing that we mourn, but there are times when the one person has to be taken out because human life is too valuable. Does that make sense?
So is the one that takes the life held accountable by God?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the Bible would say that's the role of governments. Governments are supposed to do that. Justified governments make those decisions. Sometimes, of course, we know they get it wrong. Sometimes, and this is where Christians have wrestled with and developed what they call the just war theory. When is it right and justified to go to war and potentially kill someone? And there's a lot of little caveats. It's always supposed to be defensive and not offensive. And when when you believe that you're going to save more lives than not, and when it's done in a way that's humane and this and that. So there's some rules that have been developed throughout church history, largely with Augustine, of wrestling with this question. But I think it's obviously a good question, and but I think the answer is God gives authority to people, not individuals per se, but to people to have to make these difficult decisions. And governments, it's their responsibility to honor life by sometimes having to take life. I know it's difficult. Yes, sir.
You can also think of it as protecting your family.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you've got laws in the Old Testament, if somebody's breaking into your house and you believe you're at risk, then you are justified in taking this life to protect yourself and your family. Yeah. Okay. Anything else before we sing a song? All right, we're going to sing How Great Thou Art. So if you want to stand. It's possible that I play this song a little differently than what you're used to.